Hi, Kat here for Lightwave Digital. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some interesting tools that you can work with to help build out scenes very quickly and get objects that may be something that you set up originally as instances into actual geometry so you can work with them in other systems like Turbulence FD or Lightwave Flow or Bullet, for example, because in most cases, instances won't interact with that because they're virtual geometry, they're not real geometry. So let's get started. Here I have a very simple scene setup. Take a look at it in VPR. It's basically just a plane with a texture applied to it. Nothing really exciting, but we're going to keep it simple just for this demonstration. So let's go and load something simple to work with. Let's go and load an object called a simple brick, and we'll pull that in. And we can see that it's come in, but it's come in kind of a way that I don't want because it was originally built in Modeler and I had it centered. So if we take a look at this in Modeler, you'll see that that simple brick has been centered so that it's effectively centered to the origin in Modeler. Whereas the actual ground plane has been offset to rest just underneath the x-axis. Now in Modeler, to do these types of operations, you have a tool, which is F3, that allows you to move objects and have them sit either above or below that, or F2, which will center the object. F3, though, is the one we were talking about because there's equivalent of that in Lightwave Digital Tools. So we want this to be underneath, boom, so it can sit there. With the brick, of course, we're going to leave centered. So I can demonstrate this tool for you. Bouncing over to the Lightwave Modeler, let's take a look at the scene with shaded texture solid. We can see it's kind of cut off in the middle. So let's run that rest on ground. And if you don't have these buttons, don't worry about it. You can add them customly by hitting the edit menu, configure menus, typing LD, find the tool that you want. In this case, it was LD rest on ground. I made a menu called extra stuff underneath of my Lightwave Pro preset system tab, and just added them as tools for us to demonstrate today. But if you need to find them, that's where you can find them. Just search for them and add them custom-wise. So this simple brick, I want it to rest on ground on the Y value. So it's going to sit above or some ground object. So there it is. It's now sitting right on top, mathematically perfect in relationship to the x-axis. If I want to put it underneath, use the ceiling minus Y, and there you go. You can also add an offset should you need to. For right now, we'll just leave this where it needs to be, and we'll go and create a new object called instanced bricks. Okay. So now we've got a null in the scene. We're going to double click it, and it's going to bring up this object properties tab, and you can also use the shortcut P. If I hit P right now, it'll close it. P again, it'll bring it back up. So we want the instance tab. We're going to add the native Lightwave instancer, and we'll double click this, and it'll bring up this lovely window that gives you some options here. So what we want to do is we're going to add an object. We want the simple brick, and we're going to change this viewing to texture shaded solid. Okay, and instead of item pivot, I'm going to do something like a rectangular array here. Now, it's going to come up with some defaults, 5 instances on each axis and a 1 meter offset for each one. We're going to have to change this a little bit. So let's just pan ourselves around. And we don't need any Z instances. And I think our Y alignment should be offset from basically 0 plus rather than 0, so that they're going up and down, above and below the axis. We just want them to be above, and that way we can just change their Y spacing so they can sit on top of each other more or less. Now, if you know the exact dimensions of this object, you can punch these numbers in, but right now I'm lazy and I don't know those numbers, so I'm not going to go back into Modeler and figure out what that is. But those are pretty much sitting on top of each other. We can check that really quickly, going front face wireframe, and just make sure that you don't have any overlay. So there's some overlap, and it's pretty much going to be 200 millimeters. That's them directly sitting on top of each other in terms of mathematics and accuracy. So back to this view, texture state solid. Okay, we need to change the X spacing. We'll get them as close as we can together. Okay, cool. And for a little bit of rotation on these, we'll do a little bit of minimum and a little bit of maximum on their heading. So they kind of look a little offset, not so uniform. We don't want to go too crazy because I don't want them to smash into or cross over on each other. So we're going to set this up so that we can work with these in bullet. Okay, so let's just offset these a little bit more. A little bit more maybe. That should be good. Okay. So now I've got something like that. I can now take a look at baking them to a set of objects, like an actual real world set of objects. And that'll allow them to be visible geometry wise to physics systems like Lightwave Flow, Turbulence FD, and Bullet, as well as hard effects and soft effects and any other of the systems that would need real geometry in order to understand what is going on with them over the course of animation with physics system, for example. Now, this is slightly offset, so I want to make sure that we're in the right spot. And I also want to point out that this brick is still in here, the original brick. Now, we're going to leave this on in the scene for a moment until I bake this set of instances out. I want to make sure that this is sitting properly. So it's going to be 0.1 millimeters or 100 millimeters off the ground so that they're just sitting there right on ground. Okay. Because when we instance this, it's instancing it from the item pivot. So that simple brick, when we instance it, it comes in and it's instanced off of the item pivot originally as it was set in modeler, rather than the offset that we use with rest on ground. So now that we've got something like that, we can use the instance baker, making sure that we have the instance brick, which is the item that is the instance generator handler. Okay, so we can run instance baker, and we'll get a couple of options here. If you have nodal animation on your instances, or you have envelopes that are controlling animation, or there's a texture that's running through, like the min, max, pitch, whatever, the offset, scale, all these are animatable that have envelopes or T's next to them. You can use the timeline animation range to bake the instances out to objects that have keyframes on them with those motions. You can also do it to nulls, but in my case, I want actual objects, but I don't want to do any animation here. I want to just bake out the current frame, so I can just leave the options as they are. So we can hit OK, and we'll notice right off the bat that we've got a null with all these objects attached to it. So I can take this null and move it, and we can see that we've got a wall of objects that are based off of the original instance, and then of course the instanced objects, which are virtual. As far as the renderer is concerned, they're going to show up exactly as they should, but for physics systems, this is a virtual set of bricks, this is a real set of bricks, and we want the real set of bricks to interact with. So now that we've got that, I can either turn off the instancer, delete it because I've already got the geometry, but in case I want to do some other type of work or offset it and rebake them again, we'll just turn it off for the moment. And I'm also going to turn off the visibility of the original brick. And I'm going to turn off the activity, which basically shuts it off from everything in layout, including the renderer for the instance bricks and the simple brick itself. So it won't show up at all. Just put this back in the middle of the scene here. And now I can work with it for bullet. So go into VPR here and change it over to texture shaded solid mode. Let's go to effects tools and we'll go and turn off the enable dynamics function just for the moment. And we're going to go and make sure that we've got all of our bricks selected. So hold down shift and select all the bricks, very similar to any other Windows or Mac OS function. Then hit add select, and this will add our bricks. And we're also going to need our round. So we're going to add that. Okay, so starting with that from the top, we're going to change it to box just to keep the dynamics really, really simple. Turn the collision margin down to like 1 millimeter. And for the bricks, we're going to change those so it is rigid. Set them to box. Change those to 1 millimeter as well. Okay, and just make sure that this is set to static rather than rigid, so that these bricks, when we activate bullet, will not just pass through the ground. So enabling dynamics, we can see those bricks are staying there. Okay, so now we can do something fun like load an object and toss a sphere through it. So it's selected currently. I'm going to add selected from layout. And in this case, we can just use a simple sphere collision shape. And we'll change that down to 1 millimeter. And because these bricks are under the influence of gravity and there's a little bit of space in between them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just turn the activation mode once they're all selected to start sleeping. And then that way, once we've got our sphere selected and it interacts with it once it makes contact with the collision objects for the bricks, they'll activate and they won't move right off the start. So just going to the end of the timeline, I'm going to turn off the enable dynamics for a moment so I can do this really quickly. Because when I disable the dynamics, we can actually move and animate things without it trying to calculate or simulate anything. So I'm just going to ram this ball through the scene. Change a couple of other parameters here. But now that we've got that, I can hit enable dynamics and we should get a ball that, unfortunately, because it's not set to be kinematic, it was set to rigid, just dropped to the ground and didn't do much. So let's change that to kinematic. And boom, now we've got a ball that goes through that wall and knocks over some of the stuff. There we go. So changing the animation direction of this. So great. Now, granted, I've got some offsets in here that really shouldn't be there, but just to set this up really, really quickly and get nice results, it's best to go that route. So let's see if we can fix some of those issues. There we go, boom. Nice stuff. And at any point in time, because these are now real objects, I can go and offset them very easily. So I could offset every other brick, for example. Like that. Go through. Very cool stuff. Very easily set up with just a couple of simple tools using Lightwave Pro Tools.